time is now for you to arm yourself with insightful knowledge on your oil wealth. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's edition of Guyana's Oil and You. As usual, I am your hostess this evening, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg, and tonight we will be discussing some important topics in the industry, but this time with Dr. Rémi Piet, co-founder of Embellie Advisory and faculty member at the University of Miami and HEC Paris in Qatar. Mr. Piet, welcome to the program. You're no stranger to the Guyana Oil and You program, so thanks for participating tonight.
It's always a pleasure to be there, Guyana.
Excellent. So we'll dive into tonight's questions, and I want to start off first by talking a bit about the Biden administration. He was recently sworn in, and there's so much talk about what his presidency will mean for the reshaping of the oil and gas policies and the building of new relationships. And many have also asked, well, what does it mean for Guyana? I'd like to have your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid question. And maybe to answer it, I'm just going to take a step back and see it in a more general context.
Sure.
Basically, the return of the Biden administration or Democratic administration is a return to normality in American foreign policy. So a lot of the actions that will be undertaken much more at the multilateral level and less so as a direct, let's say, country-to-country basis, which was much more the trademark of the Trump administration. So a lot of the different policies and strategies and decisions from the Biden administration are going to be in line with a series of international organizations, starting with the United Nations, the choice of the ambassador to the United Nations is very interesting, and especially the fact that she's actually at the cabinet level, which was not the case before. So really taking part in the shaping of foreign policy for the U.S. So that shows really a dedication from the Biden administration to work through the WTO, the UN agencies, just joining the WHO again, and also obviously in case, and when we're actually talking about energy matters and mining matters, the question of environmental mitigation, climate change policy, and one of the first decisions from the Biden administration, actually the third executive order that President Biden has signed on his desk. The first two were related to COVID and access to care. The third one was actually into joining again the Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation. So that's going to be a cornerstone of the policies that the U.S. will favor and champion on the international scene. It doesn't mean that that the impact on Guyana is actually more an indirect impact. There's a clear and strong presence from the U.S. in Guyana. There's a clear interest in terms of foreign policy, which is actually very much in line in the interest of Guyana towards, in case of, use of resources, energy and others, so like extraction of resources, do it according to standards. And so maybe we can dig deeper on this, or if you want to go back to the, American foreign policy, I'm happy to continue.
Thank you. But before we get to that, there's an issue that's really at the forefront of many of the minds of Guyanese, and that has to do with the pandemic. We've seen how it has played out in 2020. And for 2021, I think it's really prompted a re-examination of the role of fossil fuels, particularly as it relates to oil and speeding up the transition of many countries. We've seen China, Japan, South Korea, which together account for 20% of the world's oil demand, announcing plans to be carbon neutral. So with that in mind, what are your perspectives for what the energy transition will mean for 2021, especially for new producers like Guyana?
Okay, so if I take it step by step, and first
Yes.
of all, you're very to mention first the pandemics and its importance on international economics. I mean, it's very likely that 2021 will be the year of the rebound. I mean, we've seen the kind of studies made by the IMF and other international organizations, seeing and forecasting a rebound in 2021, especially starting in Europe, compared to what happened in 2020. That will be the case, probably in the second, half of 2021 for Guyana also. There's been, it very much depends, obviously, of different variants of the virus itself. There's a specific variant in the Amazon, as you probably are very well aware, that impacts Guyana and the Guyana Shield, specifically. So that will have to be monitored and will impact the future for the domestic economy of Guyana. Now, looking at the impact that it has for oil demand, for example, and new producers, one has to see, first of all, that the impact on the economies has very different, international economies has been very different looking at different sectors. So obviously, the tourism sector has been very impacted. The restoration, the dining outside and distribution sector has seen a lot of disruption. In the case of raw material, when you look at mining, when you look at energy, those are actually operations that did not relocate or close operation during the pandemics. There's been a decrease in production in different places, but it has been less impacted as a sector than other sectors in the economy. So what does it mean for Guyana in terms of oil demand? And first of all, a retake of the international economy. We're seeing in the price of oil is actually ramping up slightly, and there's obviously ups and downs in the market. And we're seeing a potential increase of the demand if we come back to an economic situation internationally, which is demanding in energy and fuel. That could be either supplied by cleaner sources of energy, if we want to address those questions specifically, or in the case of the traditional fossil fuel, Guyana has potential that is there, obviously. There's other countries are looking for exploration, and there are even news that Norway was opening up for exploration in the Arctic Circle. It's probably better to do it in a let's say, as long as it's done well, to do it in Guyana, that to do it in the Arctic Circle in terms of the impact on the environment. And obviously the forest in Guyana is very important, but more than anything, the local content, economic diversification. There's a potential in Guyana. There's no potential in the polar circle, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
But the idea here is that the demands for oil and energy will likely be sustained in 2021. And that means a lot of potential for Guyana if it's done right.
Do you believe that the move by Guyana for energy transition and to the efforts that are being made to explore our our basin and find as much oil? Do you believe that those two can be done simultaneously?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And first of all, when you look at the energy mix, there's different use of energy for different, you
Yes.
know, industrial needs or consumption. So it's not like if you can swiftly just change from oil to better renewable sources. Now, clearly, when we're looking at the evolution, we're seeing a push for renewable energy in terms of sourcing, in terms of the quality of the supply. When we look at different companies that in all sectors that start really having sustainability division, showing up that they will only use renewably sourced sources of energy, and that is a movement that we see structurally, and that will only be increased by obviously the Biden administration, which is much more pro climate change mitigation and international agreements on this. So some tools that Guyana is very well aware of, such as RED Plus. I mentioned Norway as an example. We have to remember that Norway has a very good history with Guyana of providing funds for fighting
Yes.
against deforestation. And so those ideas here, I mean, is that those tools such as RED Plus, but others in terms of energy mix will see the light and will be pushed by internationally through the Paris Agreement. So that will have an impact, obviously, of some interest in terms of making it more viable and more politically, supported the new sources of energy. Now, in terms of Guyana, Guyana has potential for renewable energy, and those should be actually encouraged, especially as part of the wider diversification of the economy. But there's very strong potential in oil, and when you just look at the main findings in 2018, 2019, I mean Guyana, as you very well know, has a very strong place in terms of the levels of finding. And Exxon has some policies, and other actors actually had are established actors that know well they can do it better than other companies that don't have such a track record. Now, however, there needs to be the right safeguards, and that's where you need to look at the work that is done currently by the administration in Guyana, the support that has been present from different organizations, from EITI to the World Bank to different groups that will help set up the right regulatory framework and policies, and there's already a move towards this.
Thank you for that contribution. Now, there's another theme that I would like to turn your attention to. There are many in the industry who are looking at 2021 to be that year of recovery. But how cautious do you think we need to temper these expectations for the oil and gas sector, especially when one considers the rise of the new COVID-19 strains?
So, I mean, you should be, I mean, obviously, when I say cautious to the demand, that there will be a streaming down of jobs, not maybe to the level of expectations in Guyana. That doesn't, mean that when you look at the potential for local content in Guyana through the demands of oil from Guyana, that, companies should not get prepared. And we see a very good work done by different organizations, GAI and others in Guyana, to try to, promote local capacity and economy development in Guyana. The COVID situation obviously impacts international travels, impact the capacity from different populations to go to Guyana. So, other alternatives such as tourism, for example, that should be encouraged. Obviously, we're not looking at the perfect conditions in terms, not structurally, but in terms of the COVID crisis. And that also hampers potentially the capacity from the diaspora to reinvest in Guyana, to come back to Guyana and see how much the country has evolved and how, the diaspora is very much needed towards reinvesting in the economy of Guyana, not only in terms of the the oil sector, but also other sectors. And there were some very encouraging speeches and declaration made by political members encouraging diaspora to reinvest in Guyana. I mean, this is where you will see, depending on the continuance of the COVID pandemics, whether 2021 will mark the end of the pandemic and therefore people will be able to travel again more freely. I mean, I know it's possible to travel in Guyana. I'll be there in 2 weeks, but that obviously it's not the main priority in terms of international travels for people that stay at home currently. But the idea will be to try to be able to harness this, taking off of the economy post-pandemics and trickle down, a series of jobs and knowledge and capacities transparently from the energy sector. And there's good practices that are at play right now in Guyana, good methodologies that can be continued. So that's the potential is there, but that needs to be seen incrementally and steadily. And I'm confident for the future of Guyana on this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Piet. We will head to a short commercial break, and when we return, we'll continue our discussion on important matters in the oil and gas industry.
Kaieteur Radio.
Covering Guyana from
Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. If you're now joining us, this is this week's edition of Guyana's Oil and You with yours truly, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg. Joining us at the table tonight, virtually that is Dr. Rémi Piet, co-founder of Embellie Advisory, and he's also a faculty member at the University of Miami and HEC Paris in Qatar. So, Remy, we would have discussed what the Biden administration means for Guyana and the reshaping of oil and gas policies. We've looked at how the pandemic has prompted a re-examination of the role of fossil fuels. And before our commercial break, we've looked at how cautious we need to be with the oil and gas sector and our expectations, projections, especially when one takes into consideration the new COVID-19 strains. Now, I'd like to take your attention to a bit of international news, and this is on ExxonMobil. We would have seen the Wall Street Journal reporting just a few days ago that the ExxonMobil company is being investigated by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, based on complaints from a whistleblower that employees were forced to use unrealistic assumptions regarding the Permian Basin, which led to an inflating of its value, alleged inflating. What is your take on this circumstance? I mean, ExxonMobil has, of course, denied the allegations, but what, in your view, should a circumstance like this tell Guyana?
So first of all, I mean, there's an ongoing investigation. There's a whistleblower
Yes.
that actually came out and shared information. I assume. I mean, that's good. Then there's denial on the other side. So obviously, it's not my position to comment on this. I don't have insider information specifically on that basin. The basin is part of the Permian Basin. It's actually the Delaware Basin and Permian Basin, which is at the limit between Texas and New Mexico, if I'm not wrong, in terms of my U.S. geography. Hopefully, I'm not wrong on this one. But this is that's not related to Guyana and the field in Guyana. Now, whether there were some overvaluing of assets in that specific case, it's complicated to value an asset when you look at the level of reserves, the level of price. I mean, we actually mentioned we were talking about the evolution of energy prices. I don't know exactly when this was valued. If it was at 2014 when the barrel was extremely high, if it was at 2018 or 19. So obviously those are completely different levels of valuation. But let's trust the investigation on that one, and the ACC is definitely known for being able to do his work well and in detail. So we'll get the information. Now, does that impact the capacity of energy in Guyana to be a trickling of opportunities? Not specifically, and that there's a different team that actually handled Guyana, that team that might have been on that specific basin in central US, and specifically we look at the evolution of different best practices in terms of, as I mentioned, local content, in terms of environmental risk mitigation, assessment of impact on sociopolitical factors, whether you're looking at, above the ground risks for, extractive industries, or you're looking at a series of political, economic, or social impact of those industries. The methodologies are there. I trust that Exxon, in Guyana, are aware of these and implement them rightly. That will be very different from the SEC investigation in the evaluation of the Permian Basin. I know that there were also, obviously some discussions in Guyana to the level of valuation of the resources in Guyana, and there also, you have done some work looking into this, so you will know more about this than I do.
Okay, now the reason, just before we move off of this, the reason why I asked about the investigation is because many industry stakeholders that we would have interviewed over the years would have said that it's important for new producers to build their capacity to do their own valuations and not just accept what the company is producing. So would you say that this is a good reminder of the need to do independent valuations?
I mean,
Whether or not,
obviously,
apart from the outcome of the investigation, I know that that is a separate matter, but is
yeah, of
this
course.
just a reminder of the importance of doing that for ourselves?
I mean, having more information and more data, and obviously more transparent and independent data on different, matters is a very good, positive, move. I mean, hopefully, I mean, there's, I mean, always applaud, and I believe it's very important to have, third parties being involved into, either the valuation of Basin. I mean, that's really not my personal expertise, but also in questions of local content, in questions of impact on the society of Guyana, of potentiality of trickling down development roads that are in line with the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, which is going to be, for the next 4 years, as we were mentioning, the Biden administration, the link through the United Nations, and work done by other organizations such as the ITI. Sorry, that's a very long sentence, I do realize. But definitely, I mean, this is going to be something that is important to take care of, and have it done by a series of evaluation by third parties on this one. I believe it's important. I mean, you do see a series of in the energy sector, a series of checks and balances, or at least actors that are third parties that are involved into some impact assessment, and it's great that you have different voices or different reviews and studies which exchange point of views. I mean, right now the debate is there in Guyana. Obviously, it's there around the world in terms of how to mitigate environmental impact and how to increase the social and economic value of those investments. And I just hope that the debate will continue.
Thank you very much. Now let's talk a bit about diversification. It's a theme that pops up ever so often when we're talking about the oil and gas industry, the importance of not losing sight of your traditional sectors. And in Guyana, we have many, thankfully, such as the gold industry. What are your thoughts on ensuring, even as we pay attention to building the capacity for oil and gas, how important is it for us to not lose sight of ensuring proper governance in our other sectors like gold and putting the same light of scrutiny on investors?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can talk about gold extraction and projects in Guyana. When you talk about traditional sectors that have a potential, I mean, there's obviously sugar industry, the agro industry, and the tourism industries. Those also offer potential. But when you look at that part of the diversification of the economy, when you look at gold or the mining sector, I mean, it has obviously history in Guyana from the pork knockers, informal miners, and then the arrival of different actors more recently that are industrial actors that develop a more industrial form, a more regularized form of extraction of the mineral. So you do see that push also, and obviously, I mean, I'm part of different debates on the transparency of supply chains. This is coming from investors abroad. This is coming from the jewelry sector. This is coming from a series of demands that from the end users, all the intermediary users and transformators in Europe for a cleaner way of extracting minerals. Now, for example, in the gold industry, I mean, in the World Gold Council, so there was work done. I took a very modest part of it in terms of the responsible gold mining principle, meaning that all gold mining companies will have to provide a report on how the sustainable development goals are mapped to the gold sector or to the extraction at the specific mine site. So this is a work that will be done to report it to the World Gold Council. Is it done by third parties? Who's choosing the third party? That's obviously the debate that we just had on this one. But responsible miners will go towards third party to do an assessment of their capacity or the quality of their extractive behavior in Guyana, as in all other countries. So we see that push there, and the gold sector, when you see different companies that are involved in Guyana and Suriname and French Guyana, you have Iron Gold in Suriname and Newmont in Suriname. In Guyana, you have Guyana Goldfield that just been bought by Zijin Mining. You also have other actors and that are looking in Guyana very strongly from Canada, from Australia. I mean, there are companies that have a good track record or implement with third parties or work with companies on the ground, the capacity to develop, the local content of their operations and to, follow those sustainable development goals. As always, there are companies that do a good job, others that don't. But, if Guyana puts in place, the right policies and right regulation, it implements it. And again, I mentioned the work from the ITI. I can mention the work from a series of other organizations that were involved in Guyana, and some, also well-thinking, operators. As I say, you mentioned Exxon in the case of the Permian Basin. In the case of Guyana, there are some good teams, that actually work and are interested into, developing, and streaming down, local content also, and other mining companies do it also. So, trying to work at this level to define the right regulations and implement them to make sure that there's scrutiny on those sectors and that the impact on the environment is limited, and that the impact on the other sectors and diversification is, magnified or increased as much as possible with seed capital from the industry. That was, again, a very long sentence.
Thank you, but it was also a very comprehensive contribution, so thank you for that, sir.
Thank you very much.
On the concluding question, I would just like to have your thoughts on Guyana as a new oil-producing state, and we're embarking on our second year. What do you believe should be among our biggest concerns right now?
So, I mean, that's a very interesting question. And you were, kindly mentioned my work in the Middle East at Qatar, in Qatar at HEC Paris in Qatar. And that's another country, Qatar, that was a newcomer on the natural gas scene. And then Guyana is seeing the same, obviously in very different contexts. We're not looking at the same financial means, the same different actors, or even the same type of energy, but trying to find a way to enter this international, market of oil, but make sure to remain competitive, but to, increase the value for the country. So there are some, as I say, there are, right policies in place, making sure to focus on, a series of incubators, a series of entrepreneurship support. I mean, there's, platforms, obviously we work into this, but that help, increase the value and having seed capital for, bottom up, development. So a series of methodologies from the microcredit world and a little more, also, some small loans to develop some projects. So all these, are, possibilities for Guyana. If they're, rightly implemented, if it's a focus on knowledge, on training, on being able to develop, other sectors or sectors linked to the energy sector, then there will be a bright future for Guyana. But it's very important that those are implemented. And then, that Guyana is seen as an international player that, is at the top of the methodologies in terms of local development for other and good, investors to come in the country in the future also.
Indeed. And on that note, Dr. Piet, I would like to thank you very much for participating in tonight's discourse. And we do look forward to having you on the program in a few weeks. We hope that you're staying safe. And to our listeners, wherever you are, thank you so much for being part of tonight's discussion. And we look forward to having you join us next week, same time, same place, for more insightful discussions on Guyana's oil and gas.
Thank you, Guyana. Thank you to the listeners.
Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.